Good morning. This week we're going to be talking about Solomon builds the temple. And here's today's story. David was a great king for God's people. God told David that his son Solomon would build a temple. When Solomon became the king, he wanted to build a temple so God could live there. He wanted the temple to be the most dazzling, amazing building ever built. Solomon decided he would build the temple out of beautiful and expensive materials. First, Solomon told his workers to dig large stones out of the ground. "I don't want God to hear any loud building noises here," Solomon told the workers. "You need to measure, cut, and shape the stones out of the hills before you bring them here." The workers did what Solomon told them to do. Next, Solomon told his workers to make the roof and the floor out of hard, sturdy wood called cedar. Carve designs of flowers into the cedar wood and decorate the temple with the carvings, Solomon directed. "The nice smell and elegant designs will make God happy." The workers did what Solomon told them to do. Finally, Solomon made a room especially for God. "Cover the entire room in gold," he said. The workers did what Solomon told them to do. The room glowed and shimmered. When the temple was finished, Solomon put a special box called the Ark of the Covenant into the room of gold. The people had put God's 10 Commandments in the box. Wherever the Ark of the Covenant was, God was there too. The people went to the temple every day to worship God. The temple was the most impressive building ever built for God, and God was happy to live in the temple Solomon built. That's today's story. One of the questions I have for you this week is, the people worship God in the temple to feel close to God. Where do you feel close to God? Have a great week.
Good morning. It's Oliver and Jane, and I'm Miss Kelly, and today we were talking about the story Solomon builds the temple. Oliver, can you remind me what the story is about, please?
The story is about King Solomon, who ordered his men to go build the temple so they could get closer to Jesus.
Yes, they could get closer to God. Jane, tell me about this beautiful room. What is that made of?
God!
Gold. Is that your favorite color, you said? And what did they put right there? Ollie, what did they put right there?
Oh, that is a box and it contains the Ark of the Covenant.
They put the Ark of the Covenant up there, and the Ark of the Covenant had the 10 Commandments in it.
It was also an Indiana Jones movie.
It was in an Indiana Jones movie. So we did 2 activities that you can do at home to remember this story. Oliver built a temple, like a place that he would, a temple that he thought of how he would go to worship God. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I didn't exactly put the box in the Ark of the Covenant, but
That's okay. You just made what you think would be a temple. So what did you do?
I just found the pieces from my Lego sets, are just normal Legos, and I put them together to make a wall.
Yeah. I like this. What's that?
It's a roof.
Roof? It kind of looks like a steeple.
It's
No?
a roof.
No, it's a roof. Oh, okay. So it's kind of like, temples are kind of like churches, right? And that's where sometimes you can go to feel closer to God.
I feel closer to God in my bed, but okay.
You feel closer to God in your bed, maybe when you're sleeping.
closer to God up here.
You feel closer to God everywhere. You
He
feel
watches over me.
He watches over you. You feel Him everywhere. And then the other activity we did is we made our own Ark of the Covenant, and you can get a shoebox and decorate it. Jane, can you show me some of the things that you did to decorate it?
I did.
The outside. What did you do?
I did streamers, and I made a bed and the sun, a face in it, and I did little fingerprint faces, and I did a princess.
Oh, I like your
Round
princess.
and orange. And
So we used construction paper to cover the box, and then you could do stickers and paint or markers if you have it to make it fancy. And then inside we put in things that Jane put in things that reminded her of God. What do you have, Jane?
I store
A star.
a flower and a leaf
Why do those remind you of God?
because they made that.
Because God made a star, a flower, and a leaf.
Mhm.
And so maybe when you see these things, it reminds you of God.
I would have tried to put my bed in there, but okay.
You put a bed in the box. So these are 2 activities that you can do at home following the story. You can build a temple And remember, a temple is like a church or a place to worship God out of Legos. Or you can make your own Ark of the Covenant. You decorate it and put things in the Ark that remind you of God. So we hope that you have a good Sunday and are having a nice holiday season. Bye.
Bye.
Hi, hope you guys are doing well. So I always film this video the week before, one of the nights. Do you remember last week, the day that it got cold? That the wind was blowing and it was freezing? It felt freezing? That's today, and I'm still trying to warm up. I think I need more blankets. But we are talking about a different book of the Bible this week. It's 1 Kings, and it's not verse, usually I'll give you the numbers. It's an entire chapter within the book of Kings. It's chapter 6. And what is an architect? Someone that builds something, designs something, comes up with the idea. This entire chapter is devoted to building something. Do you remember from the Bible story? From hearing the Bible being read? It's a temple to God. And we know King Solomon is building it. Well, we need to back up. Last time we spoke, do you remember there was a young boy, he was roughly 12 to 15 years old, he was a shepherd, and he got called into the temple, and there was a man named Samuel who was a prophet for God, and Samuel anointed him, and he was going to become the future king of Israel. Do you remember his name? David. So that was the story of King David we learned. Well, David grew up, he became king, he had a son, and just like with royalty, when the king died, his son became the new king. That's King Solomon. That's who we're talking about. That's who built this temple to God. And it was such a big deal that we still can talk about it. So, two things interesting. One is the beginning of this chapter tells us it's been 480 years. Remember how Moses went to Egypt and helped the Israelites, the slaves, leave? You know, to Pharaoh, let my people go. Do you remember all that? And then Pharaoh let them go, and they parted the Red Sea, and they lived in the desert, and time keeps going and going and going. It's been 480 years that time has passed. And now Solomon is king and going to build a temple to God. And their temples were a little different than ours. So there's two parts to it. There was the part where the people could go, but there was a part that was apart from the people, that only the special priests could go at special times, and they believed that God was in that special area. It was reserved for God. God lived there. So, something else that's different is when we take measurements nowadays, do you guys maybe at your house have a tape measure that goes out and in and out and in, right? Well, we usually do things in inches and in feet. Well, in Bible times, they measured in cubits. Have you ever heard of one? We don't use that anymore. But a cubit is 1.5 feet. So this chapter, it was kind of crazy how specific it was laid out. We know that this temple was going to be 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. So I just did a quick conversion to feet. So it would be 90 feet long, almost 100 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 45 feet tall. It's a pretty big building. And then where the front door was, they built kind of like a covered porch over it. It's called a portico. And that was 20 cubits wide and 10 cubits tall. So we can actually kind of sketch out what it must have looked like. There was so much description. But there was one thing that was interesting that King Solomon did. He wanted nothing to be put in the walls. No nails, no wooden beams for support, nothing. So it's kind of strange. Maybe you could ask Mom or Dad or who's ever around to look up a picture on the computer of King Solomon's temple. Because you had the regular building that was the temple, but then they had side rooms, and it's really strange. The way they designed it was that it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's where they laid the beams and the wood and nailed them into on the side rooms. It was really interesting, so check that out. Now, they used stones to build the temple. But again, Solomon did something kind of strange. Usually, the stones would have been brought from a stone quarry. Do you know what a stone quarry is? Simple. It's kind of like a farm for stone. So the farmer didn't grow the stone. The stone was naturally there, and people would cut it and carve it out and then move it to where the building site was. And then once they got there, nothing ever fits quite right. So they'd use a chisel and a hammer and, maybe take some off to make it fit well. Solomon made the decision that at the quarry, the stones had to be cut to the exact size. So it was kind of interesting. If we had been alive way back then, and we'd been standing there when they were building, we wouldn't have heard the normal construction noises. It was actually quiet. And verse 7 tells us about that. So I'm in chapter 6, verse 7. In building the temple, only blocks dressed at the quarry were used, which means cut to size. And no hammer, chisel, or any iron tool was heard at the temple site while it was being built. So I guess it was kind of quiet. That's very different than how usually they did buildings. Oh, guess what happens 5 verses later? God talks to Solomon. So this is verse 12. I want to read this one to you. Am I right? No, I'm wrong. Oh, it was verse 11. Sorry. So, the word of the Lord came to Solomon. As for this temple you are building, if you follow my decrees, which kind of means my rules or how I'm laying it out, carry out my regulations, then, and keep all of my commands and obey them, I will fulfill through you the promise I gave to David your father, and I will live among the Israelites and will not abandon my people Israel. How much pressure was that for Solomon? As long as he followed all the rules God gave him, God would stay with the Israelites forever. It's a lot of pressure. What do you think? Gotta follow all the rules. Let's see what happens. So we know the temple is built out of stone, but if we were living back then and we walked in the temple, we wouldn't see stone inside. They used wood beams and covered all the stone going up. And then they carved into the wood cherubim, which are angels, and open flowers and palm trees. Let's see. And then do you know what they did next? They covered all of that with gold. So the entire wall was gold. Then they worked on, remember how I said back then the temple had a big place where the people would stand, and then a smaller place where they believed God lived. And the people couldn't go there. Only special priests on special days could. Guess what Solomon did in that room? Are you ready? Let's see. I'm going to actually read verse 19. He prepared the inner sanctuary within the temple to set the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord there. And it's where they believed God lived. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits long, 20 wide, and 20 high. Very specific. He overlaid the inside with pure gold. And he also overlaid the altar of cedar with gold. How interesting, he put gold in there also when no one would see it. But it's what God wanted, and he wanted to please God. Let's see. In the inner sanctuary, he made a pair of cherubim of olive wood. Each was 15 feet tall, 10 cubits tall, and one wing was 5 cubits long and the other. So these cherubim, what I want you to picture is the body of a lion, the face of a human, and wings. So inside this special place dedicated to God was not one cherubim, but 2 next to each other, 15 feet tall. One wing touched a wall, the other wing touched the other cherubim, then the other cherubim's wing touched the first, and the other touched the wall. They covered the entire place, and they were covered in gold. And let's see. And then they were also specific about using they used cedar wood to line the whole inside. And it wasn't just that they walked over to a close tree and cut it down and brought it in. That cedar had to come all the way from Lebanon, so it took time. It was expensive. And then there was olive wood for the door frames, and again, palm trees and open flowers were all etched into the wall. How long do you think this took to make? Do you know? In the Bible, it actually tells us. The foundation, which means the start, when they first laid the first rock of the temple of the Lord, was laid in the 4th year. In the 11th year, the temple was finished. It took 7 years to make this. That's a long time. What I thought was most interesting is Solomon trusted God. Solomon followed God's rule that God laid out, and God kept his promise and stayed with the Israelites. And this wasn't a quick little easy thing. It was very detailed and took a lot of time. It's pretty hard to do, isn't it? With everything we have to do in the course of a day, to think of God all the time, it's hard. But he's always thinking about you, and he's always thinking about me, and he's always thinking about everyone. And there's never anything that's too much for him to handle. So let's have a talk with God. Can you get cozy? I'm going to lean back. Thanks. Hey God, thank you for today. Thank you for the change in weather and that winter is coming. Please keep everyone warm and healthy, and let everyone have enough food, and please help those in need. Thank you for sharing this story with us. Thank you for letting us see how much detail Solomon put into the temple for you. Thank you for letting us understand how hard it is to do the right thing sometimes. But thank you for loving us even when we make mistakes. Please be with us this week, and hopefully we can gather together next week. Amen. See you guys next week. Bye.